don't want to give McLaren pit wall too hard a time because, to their credit, they've produced, or semi-produced, an unbelievably good Formula One car in the back end of the 2024 season. I say the pit wall because there's a lot of management there that are in charge of the technical department in effect. So all credit there. All credit too to both the drivers at McLaren, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. None of this is their fault. Oscar on the pole for the sprint race, Lando next to him. As I said yesterday, almost a certainty that McLaren finally were going to decide that if Oscar was leading on track, they would have to give the win to Lando Norris. There's only 1 point in it in a sprint race, doing about 8 points for a win, 7 points for a P2. Nothing like the difference in a Grand Prix if you go back to Hungary, and the obvious point there that Lando should have been given the win in Hungary, and the 7 points he effectively lost by finishing second there. He would effectively get 1 point back if he won the sprint race. The problem with the sprint race, of course, is it is by definition short and sweet. And most likely there was never going to be enough margin over whoever was in P3 for the two drivers to be able to change positions whenever the team deemed it to be a perfect moment. And I can imagine before the race, because that's how it turned out, that if Oscar was in front, there was lots of talk about the sort of peloton effect in the Tour de France of trying to use Oscar's DRS to help Lando pull away from Charles Leclerc, massively overcomplicating a problem that was going to, as I say, a short and sweet race. All you can do is look in that situation at two key points. And I say this not after the event. This is what I was saying during the event. The first point is you reverse positions as soon as you possibly can, because in a short race like this, a little bit like Q1 in Baku, when it was obvious there was going to be some issue on the track right at the end, whether it be traffic or a yellow flag from Esteban Ocon, he sent both cars out that late, one of them's going to get a yellow. A little bit like that in a sprint race. You cannot say that there will be no virtual safety cars, no red flag, no yellows, whatever. You have to prepare for that. And if it hasn't happened by mid-race, probably it's going to happen towards the end. That is the nature of a sprint race. And the second golden rule, in my opinion, is that you don't want the guy who's running second, your potential winner, to be spending too long in P2, because it has a detrimental effect on tyres, overheating, debris, all sorts of other things that can happen in the course of a race. So there's every reason to want to do the pass as soon as possible and get on with it in a sprint race. If it's a marathon, if it's a long Grand Prix, completely different story. But this isn't. This was a sprint race. And that doesn't mean relying on things like DRS to get a gap. This means looking at the traffic situation behind you and the risk, if one of your two cars has to slow down slightly, of jeopardizing that position. And it wasn't difficult to read what was going on behind the two McLarens in this sprint race. We had Charles Leclerc, who quite clearly from about lap 3 was holding up Max Verstappen, whose Red Bull looked in much better shape than it had in qualifying. Max all over him, obviously helped by DRS, but his tyres weren't going away, the car was well balanced, and obviously with that fresh engine, he was looking pretty good in terms of power up the hill. So at some point, Max was going to be pushing Charles Leclerc hard. Whether he was going to get past was a moot point, because the reality of McLaren's situation is that Charles Leclerc was going to be spending more time looking in his mirrors than he was at the car in front, which was Lando Norris. And sure enough, on lap 14, with all the four cars having been running around pretty closely together, the two McLarens started to pull away. Charles started to lose a bit of grip. Max was all over him, and suddenly there was a gap. And that was the perfect moment for McLaren to tell Oscar to give the lead to Lando Norris. But they didn't do it. They went into this thing about try to get Lando away, get him in your DRS, get him away, overcomplicating it massively, until towards the end of the race, there was a great risk that they weren't going to be able to do it, because Nico Hülkenberg stopped his Haas Ferrari out on the circuit. Very unusual to see oil smoke these days, something going on with the power unit, oil leak, whatever. Parked the car, very clearly going to be a virtual safety car. And only just before had Oscar slowed down and given the lead to Lando Norris. If Nico had stopped a couple of laps earlier, that would have been it. Oscar Piastri would have won that sprint race and failed to give that extra point to Lando Norris. So as I say, McLaren playing with fire, overcomplicated, I think, in the way they were trying to use Oscar to get Lando away. Lando was sitting there all over Oscar in the early laps saying, what am I going to do? I'm near enough, effectively saying, tell the guy to let me pass now. And McLaren kept saying, hold position, hold position. And at one point, Lando just said, no, whatever. A little bit in the tone of voice, well, exactly the tone of voice, actually, that he used when he was listening to all those instructions. Were they instructions? Pleads, probably, through the radio, through the headset, during the Hungarian Grand Prix. It was the same thing. And racing, as we keep saying, is not complicated. You rely on the fundamental principles. If you're going to reverse position at the front of the race, you're running 1-2, and the race is a short one, and you're never going to have a massive advantage, 8, 12 seconds over P3, You've got to look at what the traffic are doing behind and seize the moment immediately as it happens. And that happened lap 14, and McLaren didn't do it. And they played with fire, but they got away with it. They got their extra point for Lando Norris. Max Verstappen did finish third on the road. He beat Charles Leclerc, but then he lost all that with a 5-second penalty imposed after the race for a breach, would you believe, of the virtual safety car regulations. This on the back of 2 penalties in Mexico. Max needs to get his act together here and not keep shooting himself in the foot. On this occasion, he was 0.63 seconds below the minimum time behind the virtual safety car, effectively within the safety car, when the BSC went green. So that's inexcusable, really. But the bottom line is McLaren played with fire in that race, in my opinion, and they just got away with it. Having said all of that, and I don't want to be too negative about McLaren, because watching those 2 orange cars going around, and I'm going to call them orange because back in the day, in the days of Can-Am and Formula One in the 60s, when it was Bruce McLaren and Denny Hulme, particularly in the Can-Am, it was orange, but not papyrus. And it looked a little bit like the old Bruce and Denny show, those 2 orange McLarens pulling away from the field a little bit, well, certainly at the front of the field anyway. Just wonderful to see. And congratulations to the tech team at McLaren for the car they produced, and for that beam wing they've got on the car this weekend, the new one, which obviously seems to be working extremely well too. So yeah, fabulous win by McLaren in that sense. It was a 1-2 domination. Max Verstappen drove well, finished third. Very clean race by Max, apart from that virtual safety car thing. Charles Leclerc fourth. It looked like the Ferrari lost its tyres after about 14 laps. Carlos Sainz fifth, ahead of George Russell sixth. Uninspiring George Russell in the Mercedes. Not his fault, but the Mercedes just not up to it. And Pierre Gasly capitalised on a brilliant qualifying performance in the Alpine Renault to finish seventh on the road, beating such runners as Sergio Perez, Liam Lawson, who went very well in the V-Carb, Alexander Albon in the Williams, and guess what? Lewis Hamilton, who finished 11th. I never thought we'd be saying things like that about Lewis in 2024, but there we are. Not a good day for him at all. Oliver Behrman dropped down the field to finish 14th. So a dominant win for McLaren-Mercedes, but it was close. It was close of what they were trying to do for Lando. And the race was run in the dry as well, despite all the thunderstorm signs and the lightning signs coming up over Sao Paulo on this Saturday. It was a dry race. But now, I'm recording this video, we're putting it out. But now, of course, we wait for qualifying for the Grand Prix. The Max car looks to be a lot quicker now, but the most he's going to do is qualify P6. And more likely it's going to be 7 or 8 given the speed of the McLaren. And as I said yesterday, that's going to be a big problem for him going into the first corner in terms of avoiding the traffic and making sure all his front wing end plates and the back of the car is still in one piece as he comes out of turns 1 and 2. Anyway, there we go. The sprint race, a win for Lando Norris from Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen, at the moment P3. Yeah, it was certainly not as easy as the results make it sound. See you soon.